Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here, and I have a very, very cool knife to review with you today. This is the Spyderco Smock, which probably everyone who's watching this already knows. If you're interested in knives at all, you're probably aware of this knife. It is a very cool knife in a very cool configuration, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. And so for all of those reasons, I have to tell you guys right out of the gate that I do like this knife. Okay, there are a couple little things that I feel like are not as good as they could be or perhaps should be, but overall I think this is a knife that is pretty interesting to me. And while I wouldn't want to own it, I've got to say I'm really glad that Spyderco made this and that this knife exists in the world so that somebody can own it. Okay, so that's my introduction to this knife. I do want to reiterate what I said in my first impressions video, and that is that if you really, really love this design, I can't really recommend that you run over to Kevin Smock, the custom maker, and try to get a custom one. He just has got some problems with reliability that make it so that I can't feel comfortable endorsing him in a video. Okay, so moving on from that, let me say one other thing about this knife, and that is this is a little small for me, and it has quite a short amount of cutting edge, which puts me off a little bit. And so I'm going to try to look past those things as we work through, but just know that right out of the box, those two things kind of put me off of this knife a little bit, while there are some other things that make this knife very, very interesting to me. So let's go ahead and give you the overall specs here. This knife is 7 15/16 overall, so it's just a hair under 8 inches, 3 3/8 on the blade length, okay, 4.5 inches in handle length, and it weighs in at 3.6 ounces. Now, one thing I should point out that I've been trying to remember, you guys always ask me about it, is the grip area here, depending on whether you hold the knife like this or like this, if you measure from here to here, okay, you get 4 inches. If you measure from here to here, you'll lose about 1/2 inch. You get 3.5 inches. So that's how the grip area looks. If you want to grip it back here, you've got 3.5 inches. If you're going to move up and grip it here, you get about 4 inches, okay? So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about one of the things that I really like and really hate all at the same time. This blade, I have to say, it's an extremely attractive blade. It's done in a grind that I really like. You guys know I like hollow grinds. I like S30V. It produces a very thin edge. This reverse Tanto blade shape or Warncliffe-ish blade shape gives you a very, very strong tip and gives you a really, really nice utility cutting tool. Okay, so all of those things I really, really like about this blade. And I haven't even mentioned the fact, and let me just point this out to you, look at the grind lines. I love, this is one of the great reasons I love satin finish knives, guys. Spyderco has these beautiful grinder satin finishes, and there are a number of Spydercos that have it. Sorry, I'm just gonna wipe off the fingerprints. At least try to wipe off the fingerprints. That's a little better. And so I've got to say, I love the way this blade looks. All right, absolutely love a lot of things about this blade. Now, what I dislike about this blade is the fact that you lose pretty well 1/2 inch of cutting edge for this rather ugly choil. And those are the two things I don't like about it. One, it's massive. Two, it's ugly, okay? And so for those two reasons, I've got to take some points off. I really feel like, and now I know all of you guys are thinking, you know, Kevin, that's to accommodate the button lock in the back and to allow the mechanism to work properly. And I get that, okay? But it kind of reminds me of the Benchmade Proxy or the Strider, where they had to have a cutout in the blade because of the internal stop pin. And I was like, well, you know, if you're gonna end up losing all that blade because of the internal stop pin, get rid of the internal stop pin. Like, you need to redesign that mechanism. And I kind of feel the same way about this knife. You really have, you're losing a lot, I feel, in losing all that blade length, and I also think you're losing something aesthetically. And so for me, that's the big sort of hiccup with this knife is I think this makes it look weird, number one. I think it makes it less useful, number two. And I think it really throws off the blade to handle ratio, okay? So I've only got like not even 3 inches of cutting edge here in an 8-inch knife, which makes no sense at all to me, All right, so that's my my big gripe about this blade. And and everything else though, guys, I really, really do like. I think this is a beautiful blade. I think it's a rather functional blade. Although I will say, even in my own testing, the way this kind of hooks back, I had a couple times where I was cutting an apple and I ended up getting like past the edge of the blade and end up getting that hook kind of caught in what I was working on. So that's, and perhaps that's one of the reasons I don't like the way they've done this, because it actually kind of messed with me a little bit. Okay, so that's the first point that I've got to make. So there you go. Blade is really, really cool. It's really, really functional, but it does have that hiccup. And that does bring us to the action on this knife, which, by the way, is superb. This is the best flipper that Spyderco has ever made. The detent is really nice, and actuating it is really, really good. Okay, now I will say this. Some people have commented or complained maybe about the fact that there's a second detent in here, and I'll see if I can show it to you. Let's see here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it here or not. Anyway, you'll have to take my word for it, but right here, kind of near my thumb, there is a second detent ball. And the reason for that is when you push the button lock in, it releases the compression lock bar, and therefore that detent ball is released from the blade, and the blade would just fall out, except the second detent holds it in. Now, I can, when I'm not on camera, depress this button and flick my wrist and get the blade to come out. So you can still play with this the way you would with an axis lock. You guys all know with the axis lock, you're gonna pull it back and give it a flick and it comes out. And that still works with this knife. It just doesn't work quite as easily because of that second detent. Now, here's my thoughts on that. I have fiddled with this and played with it and opened and closed it dozens of times in preparation for this review. And honestly, I find it easy. I find it fun. I find it just really fidgety. And so to me, the second detent is not a problem. Okay, I think it's fine. And there is another element to this. Perhaps there's a legality issue, especially here in Canada. If you could push this button, the blade would just fall out. There's a chance that this could be considered a gravity knife. And Canada's not the only place where gravity knives are illegal. So that may have been a consideration that Spyderco had in mind as well. All right, so to me, the second detent ball is completely fine. I have no complaint with it being there at all. And frankly, if you buy one of these and you really don't want it, you can remove it, and some people have. And if you go, if you do any kind of, trolling around on the forums or scrolling around on the forums, you will find some people talking about removing that second detent. All right, so what do I think of the action and the lockup and the overall function of this lockup and deployment? I think it's fantastic. One of the best flippers Spyderco has done, and one of the most interesting mechanisms that Spyderco has done. This may be the best expression of the compression lock that's out there. Really, really nicely done. Now, back to my other complaint. I do wish that they had found a way to engineer this that didn't require that giant blade cutout. So that's the last I'm going to say about the giant blade cutout. I do, again, wish that it wasn't there. I wish they would have found a different way to implement this button system, which is a great idea, by the way. One last thing, so you can see, I didn't show this and I should have. There we go, there's the knife open. You can see the compression lock come over. Let me grab another compression lock knife. So here, of course, is the most famous of all compression locks in the Para 2. You can see, same idea, right? The compression lock pops over under the stop pin there and it pinches the blade. And then as you move it out of the way, the blade can close. Same thing here. Opposite way, of course, but as I push this button, that pushes the compression lock out of the way and the blade can drop. So very, very cool way of doing a compression lock. In fact, the coolest way as far as I'm concerned. Really, really neat way of doing that. All right, so now we move on to the handle. And handle construction, we have laminated carbon fiber, which I think is fine. Spyderco really likes this. Perhaps they like it a little too much. We have stainless steel liners here with some holes drilled in that are going to lighten it up, and they're going to add, by the way, the holes kind of come from the SK23 design. And then we have a movable Spyderco clip, and it's the typical spoon clip. I will complain about this just a teeny bit. I don't really get bent out of shape about how high my knives carry in pocket. I have a bunch of different knives that carry at different depths, and it's not an issue for me, but it would have been nice to see this moved up here for sure and do something different with the lanyard hole. In fact, if you just put a standoff back here so that someone can wrap some paracord around it, you're kind of done. That's all you needed to do. But Spyderco really likes those tube lanyard holes, so there it is, getting in the way of the pocket clip. All right, so construction I think is really good, and it's fairly typical Spyderco construction, right? We've seen tons and tons of Spydercos like this. Now the area this knife kind of falls down for me is when I go to grip the knife. And honestly, when I first got this in hand, by the way, a huge thank you to @NateAndTheSticks for sending this along. So when he first sent it over to me, I got it out. The first thing I did, of course, was flip it open a couple times and realized how fantastic the action is on this knife. The second thing I did, though, was grab a hold of it and try to think about how does a person hold this knife if you're gonna start cutting some stuff with it. And this, I guess, is my favorite way, but it's not all that comfortable. It's not that comfortable here, and I can feel the pocket clip under my palm a little bit. Now back here, it's kind of a little more comfortable. I don't feel the pocket clip as much, but I'm like miles away from the cutting edge, which I really dislike. And so for me, the other hit I have to give this knife is one of ergonomics. I really don't like the way this knife feels in hand, and I still, after quite a bit of time spent with this knife and even doing some cutting tasks with it, I kind of feel like I keep wanting to switch back and forth, and I don't know which one to use, and I don't find one particularly comfortable. Now, one question I did have, and I'll respond to it, is in all the things that I did with this knife, never once did I depress this lock and accidentally close the knife when I didn't want to. One, the way this front finger lands, even if you do it this way, you can see that my fingers never land on that button. I really don't know how you'd get, maybe in a reverse grip, you could get your finger to land on the button, but even then I'm having a really hard time depressing it. So I really don't think that is going to be a problem. People have complained about that with other button locks, but again, I've never really experienced that as an issue with any button lock, including this button compression lock variant. Okay. Finally, let's do some comparisons here. Now, this is an interesting knife, and there are some others. I think the most comparable knife that I have around is the Real Steel Griffin. The aluminum here makes the Griffin not quite as grippy, I guess, as it could be, but this is a fantastic knife. It's completely fantastic. Great action, great deployment, highly functional button lock, no blade play, and of course, this particular one is fairly budget friendly. Now, there is a titanium version that, I don't know, I've never been that excited about the titanium version of this knife, but the budget one is pretty nice, and it's a very similar size to the Smock. So if you're having Smock envy and you you want something to tide you over till they're back in stock somewhere, this might be a good option for you. Or if you want something in similar size and similar fidget factor, I guess, this would be a good option, and it's going to cost you quite a bit less. So that's the Real Steel Griffin. Of course, when we're talking about Spydercos and compression locks, we need to bring in the Para 2. And here's one thing that illustrates a complaint I've often made about the Para 2. The cutting edge is not that different. I think the Para 2 has like 1/4 of an inch or maybe 3/8 of an inch more cutting edge than the Smock for a knife that's quite a bit bigger, which demonstrates that both of them really struggle in that blade cutting edge to size ratio department. Both of them are a little rough along those lines. If someone said to me, you have to pick one of these knives to keep in your collection forever, I'm absolutely going with the Para 2. I just find it much more comfortable in hand. All right. And because of that, and I also, this Para 2 has been around for a long time, and I, of course, really, really like it. So, yeah, I will say this, though. The Smock is probably prettier, all right, at least as far as I'm concerned. There'll be some of you who just love the look of the Para 2. I like it, but I think the Smock is a really cool looking knife. What else have we got here? Let's bring in a Rat Model 1 very quickly, mostly for size comparison, since everyone's very familiar with a Rat Model 1. Benchmade Super Freak happens to be around the office today, so we'll bring this guy in. You know, here's a knife that really does have a great fidget factor, as many Benchmades do. And I think if you're looking at the Smock, perhaps a Benchmade 940 would be something that you might want to look at. Obviously, similar blade shape, similar size, and although the axis lock is not a button lock, it definitely has that same fidget factor. Oh, look. So I do have this guy around. So this is the Spyderco Amalgam. So we're looking at two of the sort of big deals from Spyderco for 2019. The Amalgam probably doesn't get as much love as I think it deserves. I find this to be fantastic. Probably one of the best Spydercos of the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, since the Manix 2XL maybe. This is a really, really well done knife, and I really, really like it. It excels in exactly the areas I feel like the Smock is weak. It feels wonderful in hand. It has tons of cutting edge. Very, very utilitarian knife. Oh yeah, one last knife since we've got it here, and since everyone is very familiar, here is a Buck 110. This, of course, is the Silver Fox that you can get from SK Blades. Really, really nice knife, and I've been carrying this quite a bit for review. Really cool knife, more brought in because of the size comparison. Everyone's kind of familiar with the Buck 110. Okay, so there you go, guys. What are my overall thoughts? By the way, the value, the price point on this, and I maybe should have been talking about that as we worked our way through. These go for like 160 something, 160, I don't know. Let's go with 165. I think it's a little less than that. Maybe it's 163, which I think is fine. You know, you're getting some extra innovation. Spyderco does tend to charge a little more for the Taiwan-made Spydercos. Presumably, they've invested a fair amount into that manufacturing facility. That's the only justification that I can think of for the kind of cost that they ask. Yeah, this is a very beautiful knife. I really think it's a cool looking knife. The blade cutout does put me off, and the ergonomics put me off as well. But, you know, even given those weak points, I can absolutely see why people would want this knife. It's really, really cool. It's very comfortable, lightweight EDC. It's got this great mechanism, which I really do think is the best expression of the compression lock. It is really, really comfortable. It flips really well. And just for fidget factor alone, I think some people will want to buy this, and I totally, totally get it. So there you go. What do I think of this knife? I think it's a really cool knife. I think it works. Everything functions very well. It flips really well. The action is fantastic. I don't love the way it feels in hand, and I wish they would have done something different around how they engineered this whole area of the knife so that they could get around putting that giant cut in the blade. All right. There you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this knife in the comments down below. We'll talk to you soon.